Oh,
Oh,
it
there we
says
go.
recording now.
We are good. I figured it out. Alrighty. As we wait for some more people to get here, I'm just going to ask the first question. And the first question is, hey, Matthew, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Absolutely, Rachel. For those of you who don't know me somehow, my name is Matthew Jenkins Jaroszewicz. I've been the assistant conductor of the Canton Symphony Orchestra and the music director of the Canton Youth Symphonies now for 3 years, three full seasons, well, 2.5, 2 2/3, if you want to put it that way, due to the virus, of course. But I arrived in August of 2017 and still here, still loving it. Love all of you, love the orchestra, and I'm thrilled to get to help all of you get to know me a little bit better. I did want to say, like, I see this evening essentially as in England, the British Prime Minister once a week has to sit in the Chamber of Parliament and literally, like, essentially take the heat from Parliament and answer any questions that they may throw at him or her. And that's literally what tonight is. Like, anything at all you want to know about me, I will tell you if for some reason I don't feel comfortable answering the question, but I doubt that will happen. I'm really happy to talk about anything and everything, and I'm looking forward to doing so.
Awesome. Alrighty. So MJ also has arrived. So, hey, MJ, can you turn on your video in the bottom left? Let's see if that works. Or you can just start. Let's see. MJ appears. Can you hear me, MJ? He's not muted. That's okay. We'll just keep going. So MJ Albacete is also here with us. He does a lot of speaking at the Canton Symphony, and I know that he has a lot of questions for Matthew. So if there is a lull in the air, per se, don't worry. MJ has questions. He has lots of them. I know that someone asked a question in the chat already about silent movies and movies. And so Matthew, do you have any, it says what silent movies or movies will you be doing? But it says, like, I know that you've done one in the past. Maybe do you have like a fun plan to do another one?
How safe of a space is this?
I feel like this is a safe space. Why?
All right. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. So last season, well, I guess we can now say 2 seasons ago, the 2018-2019 season, going into that season, I asked the powers that be at the Canton Symphony if we could do a silent film. And I suggested that we do The Freshman, starring Harold Lloyd, because we had a slot open for a concert the weekend of the Super Bowl, the day before the Super Bowl. And The Freshman is a film about football. So what a more fun way to get excited for the Super Bowl than to watch a silent film with live orchestra about football the night before the game. I thought that this would be a great idea. And I have to say, it was one of my favorite concerts that I have conducted at the Canton Symphony. I enjoyed it so much. The week leading up to the performance was the week of the polar vortex, the 2019 polar vortex. Temperatures were in the negative teens that week, and the symphony offices were closed, schools were closed, everything was canceled. And it was actually not dissimilar to what we're experiencing right now. We all sort of just hunkered down at home for a couple days. And it was a lot shorter of a time than this, of course, but I basically sat in my home and watched this movie over and over and over and over and over again. And I sang the score along with it. And it was a piano reduction score, so it was actually not too difficult. Just singing the melody along. The biggest thing in a silent film is not necessarily that you shape the most perfectly sculpted phrases that have ever been heard by an orchestra, but rather, especially in this situation, was to make sure that the film and the orchestra stay together, because the film is going to keep going no matter what. And at the end of each piece, at the beginning of each piece, was a little description of what I should see onto the screen when I start the next number. But I also went through and put some sticky notes in the score so that I knew within each piece just some reference points. And can we not? Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. So anyway, the concert was a lot of fun, and it was one of my favorite concerts that I've done. But yes, we can hear you now. So the only unfortunate thing about that performance was that it was attended by about 300 people, and regrettably, it simply didn't even come close to making up what it cost to produce. And that was there were a lot of different factors a couple different factors that led to that. But because it was such a financial failure, it's, I would say, unlikely that we will be able to do another silent film in the near future unless somehow we were to get a donation that was a large donation that specifically was for the purpose of putting on a silent film. But yeah, unfortunately, it just didn't do well financially, even though it was an artistic triumph. And it's hard to, I convinced everyone to take a chance on it once, and it didn't work out financially. So regrettably, we probably won't be doing another one in the near future, much to my chagrin, because I loved the experience and I would do it every year in a heartbeat if we could.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, MJ, I see that you've now joined us. Can you say hi?
Good evening. Yes, I had a little trouble here. A little confusion. Am I on all right now?
You are. It doesn't seem like your service is that great. You're a little craggly, but if you want to maybe ask Matthew one of your first questions, that would be great.
Very good. Very good indeed. Matthew, the first question I had in mind when you first confronted the Canton Symphony Orchestra, standing in front of the orchestra, what impressed you most about this ensemble? I mean, this is like cold turkey. What struck you about this ensemble?
So I'm going to address the first time I stood in front of the full orchestra, which was the rehearsal for the 2017 Labor Day concert in the park. And two things I distinctly remember from the moment I gave the first downbeat, thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I don't think I've ever conducted a better orchestra in my entire life. And at that point, 2017, I had been conducting for 8 years at that point. And I had stood in front of many orchestras in a number of different states and even countries. And I was standing on the podium at Umstad Hall. The acoustic shell wasn't even up. But I thought to myself, just literally the first run through of the first piece, oh my gosh, this is the best orchestra I've ever stood in front of. And I have always just been blown away that Canton, Ohio, population circa 75,000, has an orchestra the quality of the Canton Symphony. It truly, and I trained in New York City. I got my master's degree in conducting in New York City. I saw a lot of great orchestras play at Carnegie Hall. And I'm not going to say the Canton Symphony is as good as the Berlin Philharmonic, but I can vouch very much from an experienced perspective, the Canton Symphony is a great orchestra. The other thing that I will say about that experience is that by the end of the rehearsal, it was the Labor Day concert, Pop's concert, and I had about 70 minutes of music, and I had to get through all of it in 2 hours and 15 minutes of working time. For those of you who don't know how a union orchestra operates, each of our rehearsals are scheduled for 2 hours and 30 minutes, and it's what we call a service. And the musicians of the orchestra get paid per service. So either a 2.5 hour rehearsal or a performance, which can go no longer than 2.5 hours, which performances never do. But either a rehearsal or performance, it's what we call a service, and the musicians get paid the same amount for each one of those. But I had 2 hours and 15 minutes because the musicians also get a 15-minute break in the middle of the rehearsal. And I had to rehearse 70 minutes of music in 2 hours and 15 minutes. And it was very daunting. I knew I had to do that. And I knew basically I had to keep moving no matter what through the repertoire. I couldn't harp on anything. The point of the exercise was not to, again, sort of like I said with the silent film, for a Pop's concert, the point of the exercise is not to craft the most finely shaped phrases you've ever heard in your life. A Pop's concert is much more about, especially Labor Day, sitting back under the stars on a beautiful warm night, in the waning days of summer, and just enjoying lovely music played by a great orchestra. So I did get through all the repertoire that we had to get through. But at the end of the rehearsal, I sort of reflected, and I thought to myself, it's truly amazing just how much you can get done when everybody is a great musician. When everyone's sort of on the same professional level, it's incredible how much you could get done. And the rehearsal was great, the concert was great, and my time here was off to a great start from the get-go.
That's awesome. So reminder, anyone else who's here, if you have a question, feel free to just type it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and just ask it out loud, you can do that as well. So I don't see any questions in the chat yet. So I know that MJ.
I would love it, by the way. I would love it if people would just ask questions out loud. I warmly invite everybody to do so.
Here's one while we're waiting for some responses. Gerhard Zimmerman wanted to be a baseball player as a youth, but circumstances prevailed against him. Instead, he turned to music and he mastered it. It has turned out to be a great conductor. So what inspired you? Where along the way as a child or wherever did you get the idea that you ever wanted to be a conductor?
So I never aspired to be a professional athlete like Maestro, although I do love baseball and football both.
People love
as a spectator.
Everyone at the Symphony loves baseball.
But I did go through a period of time where I wanted to be an oceanographer and discover shipwrecks. I was obsessed with the Titanic as a kid. I had all those books that had the Ken Marshall paintings of the Titanic and the Titanic sinking and the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean. I just thought it was so fascinating. I actually got to hear Dr. Robert Ballard speak when he came to Cincinnati when I was a kid. My parents took me, and the man who first discovered the wreck of the Titanic. And then I went through a period of time where I wanted to be an astronaut. I went to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama. I built model rockets. I watched the movie October Sky again and again and again. And then sort of both of those just waned after a period of time. And I sort of thought by the end of high school, somewhat more practically, I guess, I knew that I was blessed with a good brain between my shoulders, between my ears. And I decided I would probably pursue a science for a PhD route in a lab science, essentially. Now, at the same time in high school, I was just purely for fun, I would go down to especially after I could drive, I would go down to the public library in Cincinnati, the downtown public library, and they had a wonderful musical score collection. And I would take my Walkman my CD Walkman, and I would go and get a CD and a score from the library and usually just sit in the library. Sometimes I would take them home, and I would put the CD in, follow along with the score, and sometimes wave my arms, just purely for fun. Literally never thought it would amount to anything. And then when I got to college, I actually had an opportunity to conduct. Again, I'm still taking all these math, science, STEM type classes. I did take music theory my freshman year as my non-major fun elective at the time. And I had an opportunity to conduct my freshman year, sort of on a whim, the Brown University Gilbert and Sullivan, regrettably a group that no longer exists at Brown, but at the time it was a thriving amateur theater group that did Gilbert and Sullivan operettas and fully staged with orchestra, and did one every semester. And they were looking for a music director, and I sort of threw my name into the hat completely on a whim. And I was a freshman, 18 years old, and had no idea what I was doing, but I had a lot of enthusiasm, and I just said, I've always wanted to try this. I've thought about trying it, and I'd love to just see what it's like, essentially. And I got to conduct Iolanthe by Gilbert and Sullivan. And that experience in and of itself did not make me want to pursue conducting professionally. But I got to do another Gilbert and Sullivan in the fall, and then I decided totally crazily to produce my own production of a Vaughan Williams grand opera, The Pilgrim's Progress, the summer after my sophomore year of college. And what sort of flipped the switch for me was I was telling myself, I really need to do this now. If I really want to do something like this in my life, like a bucket list thing, conduct a grand opera by my favorite composer, Ralph Vaughan Williams, I have to do it now before I have to really start focusing on my real career. And that was sort of what flipped the switch for me, because I realized that if what I really wanted to be devoting my time to was conducting, then I should at least try to conduct and to see how far I could take it, essentially. And if it didn't work out, I figured I could always change directions, but it was going to be easier to try as a young person than to try to get into it later in life. So basically at the end of my sophomore year of college, I decided, while I liked science classes, I enjoyed the material that I learned in the classes very much, and I continued to take them for the rest of my time in college. But I decided what I really saw myself doing for the rest of my life was conducting, in a way that I don't think I could have ever before imagined myself doing anything else.
Yeah. I know we have Leslie says, can you tell us about conducting lessons and carols last December at Columbia in New York City, I think?
Yes, absolutely. So I was approached by a colleague of mine from graduate school, Julian Bennett Holmes. He approached me in the summer of 2019, last summer. And he asked me if I would be interested in helping him put together an annual festival of 9 lessons and carols at Columbia in the style of the same service that is done at King's College, Cambridge in England, and broadcast on the radio throughout the world every year on Christmas Eve. And he asked me because probably of anyone he knew, I am, for those who don't know, I'm a lifelong member of the Episcopal Church, the American branch of the Church of England. And we are so big into Anglican choral music in our church. And it's just it's a sound that I have heard since I was a child. And it's a music that has always been very special to me. And moreover, especially the service of lessons and carols has been incredibly special. My church in Cincinnati that I grew up at would do one every year, and we would always go. And then in New York City, I attended St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, and they probably have the most well-known one in this country. So it was a no-brainer to agree to do it when I was asked. And so I basically went through the choral repertoire of the Christmas season and the repertoire that lines up with each of the 9 lessons in the service, and picked music that would fit it. Basically, it was straight out of the King's College playbook, all the stuff you would hear at King's. And in addition, King's College commissions a new carol from a living composer every year. And Julian, who asked me to do it, wrote a new carol as well that I got to conduct the world premiere of. So then between my network of singers who I knew from my days in New York City and his network, as well as Columbia and Manhattan School of Music, where he got his master's degree, we cobbled together a pickup choir of about 16 people, something like that. I borrowed choral robes from my church in Cleveland, Trinity Cathedral. I drove them from Cleveland to New York City, and I think we had 3 rehearsals, and then we did our service, and it was just a glorious, glorious experience. Totally not what I'm typically do these days. I almost exclusively do orchestral conducting these days, but I did spend time right out of college as a choral conductor. I conducted an unauditioned adult community choir in a northern suburb of Boston, Wakefield, Massachusetts. And I also conducted a church choir at a small Episcopal church in Holliston, Massachusetts, west of Boston, for 2 years. So I had a choral conducting background, but I hadn't done it in a while. And it was just lovely to get a chance to do it again, and on repertoire that's been near and dear to my heart since I was a child.
That's awesome. Yeah, so keep doing that. Keep putting things in the chat, or if you want to say it out loud, feel free. I want to ask, because we have a couple youth symphony students here, and I see them, and I'm sure they have questions. They're smiling at me now. I know we've talked about this a lot, but what has it been like to grow with the youth symphony program and to conduct a youth symphony program?
It has been one of the most unexpected, wonderful surprises of my experience in Canton. And I say that because I never in my career saw myself, especially once I got to grad school. But I really, my goal was, and still is, to conduct professional musicians at the highest level that I can possibly reach. And being a teacher figure, working with students, was certainly never the end goal, and still isn't the end goal. But I sort of, Caitlin and Alyssa, take this for what it's worth. I sort of just saw it as, in some ways, a necessary evil of the position in Canton when I first arrived. And I saw the benefit to me purely as being, this is going to be an opportunity for me to cut my teeth on standard orchestral repertoire. And it's probably going to sound bad, but at least I will have waved my arms through it once, so that when I do it again in the future, it'll be better. But it has been one of my favorite, especially like this year. Each year, the group has gotten better and better. The quality of the ensemble has grown each year. And Alyssa, I don't know what Alyssa's perspective, having been in the group for, I think, 8 years. Alyssa Allen.
9. 7? We're counting.
So either way, Alyssa Allen just graduated from 7. Okay.
7.
Alyssa Allen here just graduated from Hoover High School this year. She was, at the time, the longest tenured member at the time that she graduated. And she was here before, of course, before I was here. And so I'm sure she could speak to this, what the group has looked like during her time and the quality of the group. But I really feel like the group has gotten better and better each year. And I was so surprised at how rewarding it was to watch the growth of this group and the growth of the individual students in the group, as well as the group as a whole, and to see the excitement of everyone, again, especially the past 2 years, to see the excitement of everyone of playing the repertoire we were playing, and they were seeing it for the first time, and I was conducting it for the first time, and we were all sort of exploring it together for the first time, and watching it go from being a barely recognizable crash through of the piece at the first rehearsal to, I would truly say that especially the Canton Youth Symphony Advanced Orchestra plays at the level of a liberal arts, a small rural liberal arts college. The Canton Youth Symphony is at least an equal of a group like that. And to watch the process and watch them discover these pieces and to watch them grow as musicians and as a group and make friendships with each other. And it has been such an unexpected reward about my position here at the Canton Symphony.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Well, Matthew, the first time I watched you conduct Canton Symphony Orchestra, you know, I had a long history sitting in the seats at the Symphony Hall there. I could see right away the musicians really liked you. They took to you at once. They respected you. And your style of conducting, I have to say, was so intense. It was so specific and so broad that it gave me the impression that you were in fact playing a large instrument yourself, the orchestra, the instrument of the orchestra. You seemed to be shaping and supervising every nuance, and yet for all that, you know, you kind of reminded me a little bit of Leonard Bernstein, and yet I think every movement that you did, every gesture that you made meant something to the orchestra that I could hear in the music. So I was just like jumping out of my seat to see this performance. It meant that much to me. So respond to that. Let me embarrass you a little bit. Respond to that zeal, that enthusiasm that I felt seeing it the first time.
Well, I have to say I am extremely honored to be compared to the great Leonard Bernstein. That is, especially, I feel like for somebody with my approach to conducting, that is just about the highest compliment you could pay me. I really, Richard Strauss, wonderful composer of some of the most beautiful music ever written for the symphony orchestra. Richard Strauss wrote a treatise on conducting about how basically if the conductor breaks a sweat on the podium, he's moving too much and working too hard. And I guess in theory, that's one approach, but that's not the approach I take. And I feel like one of my greatest assets as a conductor is my enthusiasm on the podium. I love orchestral music, and I want the way that I feel about it to be conveyed to the musicians and hopefully to the audience as well. Now, the tough thing as a conductor, and especially when you just love every note of a piece you're conducting, the tough thing is to not just get carried away in the musicians. Sorry, not just get carried away in the music, but rather to conduct the musicians the entire time, not just conduct the music. You could show something that goes along very well with how the music is at that point. But if it's not actually helping the people who are in front of you, then it's not worth doing. And I'm a work in progress in that regard. I had the fortune during this time of quarantine, none of us conductors are working, and I've had the fortune to have my conducting video looked at by a number of professional conductors at higher echelons of the totem pole than I am. And it's been an incredible experience to be mentored in a way by these people, at least in a small way. And they pointed out times, oh, you know what, you are so loving the music there, but these instruments are doing something else and you're not helping them at all. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm just totally into this lovely, lush melody, and I'm not really helping the musicians that need me the most. So it's a difficult balancing act, balancing your enthusiasm and conveying the energy that you have for the piece so that the musicians can feel it and feed off of it and give just a little bit more than they may have otherwise given without you. But also to make sure that everything you're doing is helping the musicians sitting before you to play better.
I would say, Matthew, that you don't have a problem with enthusiasm.
Thank you.
I feel like
I hope I never lose that.
No, and I think that's a really good thing. And I feel like a lot of the Canton Symphony patrons love it. And I think a question kind of follow up to that is, this season, even though this season was cut short, you got to conduct a lot this season. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to know, because I remember you in the office, like kind of having a moment of like, oh my gosh. But what was that like to actually step into Gerhardt's shoes for a little bit and do more of the season than is typical for you?
It was, as I put it to someone, a wild ride. A fun ride, but a wild ride. And but also an incredible learning experience, just a completely invaluable learning experience. So to put it in perspective, between Canton as well as a guest conducting gig I had, between the last full weekend of January and the first full weekend of March, so January 25th through March 8th, I conducted 7 performances. I conducted 5 performances in a 7-week span. And it started off with the Sasson Organ Symphony. And before that, there hadn't been anything going on. The last performance I conducted was the Lessons and Carols at Columbia. So there hadn't been anything going on before that. So I had all this time that I had already set aside to learn the Sasson and learn the Guillemot, and I was going to have plenty of time to really sink my teeth into it. So when I found out 2 weeks before the first rehearsal that I was going to conduct, that I was probably going to conduct the concert. And just to be ready, I wasn't freaked out. I had already conducted on short notice my first season when I did The Secret Gift at around Christmas time on a Masterworks concert because Maestro had been sick. And then even this past November, I had to cover a rehearsal for him for the same reason. He was under the weather. And so I wasn't so intimidated by doing that concert. and I had all this time to prepare, and the rehearsal process was so much fun, and the concert was so much fun. And then all I wanted to do for the next week was listen to the audio, the archival audio of the Sasson over and over and over again, and sort of just relish in a triumphant moment of my career. I think it was the best performance I've conducted in 11 years of my career. The Sasson specifically, the whole concert, but the Sasson specifically. And all I wanted to do was just think about it and listen to it over and over. But I had to conduct the Music of Queen Pops concert the following Saturday, and I couldn't bask in the glory. I had to just flip a switch, forget it ever happened, and just think about Freddie Mercury for a week. And it was hard. It was a professional learning experience for me. Then Queen concert in the books. It went great, really fun. I turned 30 2 days after the Queen concert. And 2 days after that, I left to go skiing in British Columbia. One of my great life passions outside of music is downhill skiing. And I decided to celebrate my 30th birthday on the ski slopes. So I went out there. Except on my actual birthday, I was told, Maestro's still sick. There's a Masterworks concert next week. We can hire a guest conductor if you want us to, but we'll ask you first, do you want to conduct this concert? And the words were not even out of my boss, Michelle's mouth before I said, oh no, I want to conduct the concert. Because you never say no to an opportunity. In this profession, especially when you're an assistant, you don't know when the next big opportunity is coming along, and you never say no. So I had this vacation that was supposed to be relaxing, except now I had to study Beethoven Sixth and the overture to the Merry Wives of Windsor, at least on the flights, which is a long way out there and a long way back. So I had plenty of time, of deep focused time to really study it. But I still couldn't listen to the Sasson. I still couldn't bask in that glory. So the Beethoven concert happens. It goes great. The following weekend, we have our Youth Symphony concert. I spent the whole week leading up to that preparing the music for the next Youth Symphony concert, because the concert was on Sunday, and then Monday and Tuesday, rehearsals for the next cycle started, so the music had to be ready. Then I had a weekend off. Then I had a guest conducting gig. And then I was supposed to have one more weekend off, and then Masterworks 5 until we got into this situation. But it was an incredible learning experience having to just keep chugging along and not getting caught up in one performance when there are other great performances that you need to give.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you had your moment of basking in the glory yet?
I definitely have had the moment of the basking in the glory at this point.
It was a great concert. For those of you who weren't at the Organ Symphony concert, I had the great pleasure of being backstage while Heather was just hitting those amazing notes on the organ. And I was backstage. I literally was just laying on the floor, just listening to it. It was so good. It was not very professional, but it was so wonderful. So Matthew, I would agree. That was probably one of the best concerts ever. But yeah.
So Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Alyssa has a question. Alyssa, do you have a question?
I did, yeah. So what's your process for like learning the score before you have to conduct it? Or how long does it take you to?
Mm-hmm.
This is a wonderful question. At this point in my career, I am capable, like if I had to learn a score last minute, I could learn it to a functional point. But the proper process, it takes a lot of time. To do the process properly takes a lot of time. And essentially what I start by opening a blank score, and this is for a piece I've never done before, opening a blank score. I listen usually to 2, sometimes 3 different recordings of the piece. You never want to listen to the same one multiple times, because then you're going to end up conducting another conductor's interpretation of the piece and not forming your own interpretation. So 2 or 3 different recordings, different conductors. Then at that point, I have a good overall picture of, okay, this is how this piece goes. Then I go through the piece, my first pass. So, well, the first pass is the listening. The second pass is going through the piece and analyzing the phrases, figuring out how it's structured. Where are the arrival points? Like, music doesn't just string along forever and ever and ever. We have cadences, we have moments of arrival, and where are those points? Because then that's how I can conceptualize how the phrases are structured so that I can lead the orchestra in how they should phrase. That's the second pass. Then the third pass is sort of identifying who needs my attention when. And I have a complex color scheme that I use in my scores. Essentially a red colored pencil, because it's the one that sticks out the most. When the score is probably 3 feet, 3.5 feet below me on the podium. If it's too high, then you limit your range of motion with your hands. So I like to keep the score fairly low, which means if I glance down at it, I need to see something immediately. If it's red, it's going to pop out the most. So red is the most important thing. Whatever's going on that's the most important, I always put in red. I have a hierarchy from there down. We have green and orange are sort of the secondaries, and then brown and purple are sort of the tertiaries. But I have a complex color scheme where I go through and see who needs my attention at what point in the piece. Dynamics, at that point, I'll emphasize dynamics. If there's a crescendo, if just the word cresque is written in tiny letters, I'll draw a big crescendo across the score. So again, if I'm in the moment, I can just look down and see, oh, there's a big crescendo here, I better do it. Now, by the time I get to the performance, I generally don't have to think about all that stuff like that, but it more helps me learn it. Then everything after that is solidifying it in my mind. I literally will sit, and Rachel can attest to this, I will sit in the boardroom at the Canton Symphony office, and I will sing the score through over and over and over again. And that is the part of the process that there's no limit to the amount of times you can do it. And the more times you are able to do it, the better you're going to know the piece. Mm-hmm. So I find the more I can sing the score, the better I'm going to know it. And for me, I don't practice an instrument anymore to a high level of proficiency, but I do sing in a choir, and singing is sort of my way of internalizing the music within me. I mean, also the fact that it's a physical thing that you're doing within your own body. If I can sing a phrase, I can show it with my hands. And more importantly, I never plan what my gestures are going to look like. I used to do that, but you can't react organically to what's going on around you if you just choreograph, this is what my performance is going to look like. You have to just know the score and then use your tools, your technique that you already developed over many, many years of conducting to implement it in the moment. But if you practice exactly how you're going to conduct it, it's a bad thing. So that's sort of my process of how I learn my scores.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for those of you who for those of you who don't know, I can attest. My office is right next to the boardroom, and even with the door shut and my door shut, I occasionally would just hear loud noises happening from the boardroom, and it's Matthew practicing. Also, both of our conductors, you can hear from a mile away when they're working on their music, because Gerhardt, you can hear him coming up the elevator, humming very loudly to Beethoven or something. So I guess it's just how conductors at the Canton Symphony are. But MJ, did you have another question?
Yeah, I was trying to maybe pose you with a kind of an imaginary situation here. If you could have your ideal concert at some point, what would it be? I mean, what would your overture be? What would your symphony or the concerto or whatever? What would be your ideal concert? And flip side, what if you got stuck with a composer that you absolutely hated? Now, surely you must have either one. So tell me what you have to say about that. Best concert and bad composer.
So it's a tough question, actually, to just pick one concert, because for instance, my favorite symphony in the world is Ralph Vaughan Williams' Symphony No. 1, a C symphony. This piece is almost 70 minutes long, and if I were to program that, I would not have an overture and a concerto. The structure of that concert would look totally different. Now, if I had to try to pick a concert that would be more of a traditional looking concert, overture, concerto, symphony, based on the pieces of in those forms that I love that would fit on a program. The overture would be Richard Wagner's Overture to Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg, which I think is maybe the greatest musical creation that has ever come to this earth. And I saw a performance of it at the Cincinnati Opera back when I was 20 years old, and I had already decided I was going to try being a conductor, but I think that was the night that I truly emotionally invested myself in it, because I was so moved by the performance and just every aspect of it. I just thought that there's no greater thing I could do with my life than someday conduct this piece. So the Overture to Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg, I would say the concerto, I would probably pick Mozart's 20th Piano Concerto in D minor. If it's not my favorite concerto, it is certainly one of my favorite concertos. I would say the other one that would vie for that title would be the Brahms Violin Concerto, a piece both of these concertos I've gotten to conduct. So I guess I'm probably a little biased, having invested myself in learning them and everything, but I love both of these pieces so much. And so I think, the Brahms is such a long piece, I think that I would probably pick the Mozart just so that we could actually have the full overture, concerto, symphony. And for the symphony, if I can't have my favorite Vaughan Williams symphony, I'll pick my second favorite, which is Symphony No. 2, a London symphony. Also a piece I've gotten to conduct. I did it my last semester of graduate school with my school's orchestra, and just glorious, beautiful piece that is near and dear to my heart. So Wagner, Overture to Die Meistersinger, Mozart, 20th Piano Concerto in D minor, and Ralph Vaughan Williams, Symphony No. 2, a London symphony. Now, to address the other part of your question, there may be a mass exodus from this Zoom call, depending on people's musical tastes, but I loathe the music of George Frederick Handel with a passion. I hate the Messiah. I wish it had never been written, and I hope never to have to conduct it. I find it is 3 hours of the same melismas over and over and over and over and over. There's this much text and this much music to set it, Wagner is just the opposite. There's this much music, but there's also this much text. He never, ever repeats. He never repeats words. The Messiah, you have one sentence that's set in 4 minutes of music. And it's just not a style that appeals to me at all.
I mean, just all the runs, all the vocal runs.
And
one syllable, 4 minutes.
I would say my second and third least favorite composers would be Philip Glass and John Cage. I just am not crazy about minimalism and having the same thing sort of played over and over again for 20 minutes, and maybe one little thing changes over that whole time, but it's barely perceptible to the audience. Not crazy about that. And 4 minutes and 33 seconds and music that involves knocking pieces of furniture over and stuff like that. Just, it's not music to me. So
it's a stress reliever.
People may vehemently disagree, but there we have it.
Yeah. I think Caitlin has a question.
Yeah. So for my art class, we had to do a project where we had to choose somebody that we would like to spend one day with and spend lunch with them and get to talk to them. So if you could do that with any composer, who would you choose?
So obviously my knee jerk would be to say Rafe Vaughan Williams, simply because I would just want to hear, he's my favorite composer, and I just kind of want to hear about how he came up with all this music. I mean, I don't even vouch for Vaughan Williams as being the greatest composer that ever lived, but his music touches me in a way that almost no other music does. And I love a lot of music, but I just especially love his. And I just would love to hear him talk about how he came up with and how he does what he does harmonically and orchestrationally and all the stuff that goes into his music. I would say that on the flip side, I think it would be fascinating to meet one of like the people who was known for being sort of a wackier person, such as Mozart. Like if Mozart, as portrayed by Tom Hulce in the movie Amadeus, was actually what Mozart was like, it would be a life experience to meet someone with his personality as well as his genius, of course. So I would say probably Mozart. Vaughan Williams or Mozart, I think, would be fascinating. I would not want to meet Wagner. His music is incredible, but he was, by every single account, a horrible human being, just a nasty, nasty person. And I think he wouldn't even have the time of day to explain to me what he does. He would probably just be kind of nasty and brush me off. So, whereas I think Vaughan Williams would be delighted to talk to me about his music. So at least that's the impression I get.
I'm sure he would. All right. I think we have time for one last question. I know this hour has flown by.
If we go a little over, it's okay.
It's flown by. I don't want to keep people too long, but if you have a question and you want to throw it in the chat, feel free. But
we can go a little over. This is fun. I'm having a good time.
You feel no obligation to stay past 7.
Yeah, feel no obligation.
But if anyone has other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. MJ, I think you had another one you wanted to ask, though.
Yeah. This is sort of futuristic, the idea that for all of the concerts that we've attended over the years, we've noticed an absence of young people, really young people. And there seems to be an ongoing concern about how do we attract young people to come to symphony orchestra concerts. There's a tendency to combine the classical music or the concert music with pop music, the current stuff, which I think is a stretch. But how do you see things going in that direction, Matthew? How do we get more young people to attend concerts?
So first thing to remember, a lot of young people don't necessarily not attend because they don't want to, but rather because of extenuating life circumstances. Someone who's 32 may love classical music and have had a baby and probably won't go to the concert hall for a decade or more. But when the kid goes to college, they'll start going again. Or even when the kid can drive, they'll start going again. It is hard, though. You know, unfortunately, I think in a place like Cleveland or Boston, where I've spent a lot of time, in New York City, you see a lot of young people at the orchestra in bigger cities. And I think that for whatever reason, in Canton, there are just fewer young people that are interested in going to the symphony. Then I see fewer young people other than youth symphony members. I see fewer young people at UMSTAT than I did at Boston Symphony Hall or Carnegie Hall. There were so many 20-somes at those concerts. And I don't really know what the solution is necessarily, other than it is incredibly important that public schools continue to offer great music education. And we're really lucky to, several of our youth symphony members in my time here have chosen to pursue music education, and I'm sure will help in the going forward in that regard. But I really hope that music programs in schools continue to be funded, because otherwise, unless you have a parent that independently, they themselves like classical music and have the wherewithal, have the funds to take you as a kid, no one else but the school is going to expose you to it. And if you haven't ever been exposed to it, you're probably not going to seek it out as a patron when you're a teen or a 20-some or even a middle-aged or older adult. So I think that it starts with schools, that we need to make sure that schools continue to offer great music education from a young age all the way through.
Yeah, Matthew, your answer made me super happy. That's a good answer. That's a really good answer. I think that's really important. And I was just talking to a bunch of music teachers today about advocating for music programs. So I do agree with you. And kind of going along with that vein, Ralph was asking about your training as a young person, Matthew, about when you actually started playing music and if you played in a band or an orchestra or a choir, or, and what you did as a young person musically. Because obviously you were exposed to it quite a bit as a young person.
Yes.
You want to seek it out.
So I do come from a musical family. My great uncle was Joseph Wilcox Jenkins, a somewhat famous American composer who himself studied when he was in school, studied with two very famous American composers, Howard Hanson and Vincent Persichetti, names you may have heard. And so he's on my mom's side of the family, and my mom's parents, my grandparents on that side died. One of them died before I was born. One died when I was extremely young. So I didn't have grandparents on that side, but my great uncle was sort of the grandfather figure of that side of the family. So him being a composer, his presence affected that all of us, the whole family was aware of music. The whole family appreciated music. The whole family was aware of careers in music even. It wasn't an unusual thing. So my parents went to the symphony. My dad knew nothing about music, but when he married my mom, he started to appreciate it. My parents took me to the symphony starting when I was a very young person. We went to Music Hall in Cincinnati, a glorious old hall from 1878, I believe. I sang at the 125th anniversary of the opening back when I was a kid. I'll get to that in a second. But beautiful hall that regrettably was just modernized on the interior, but it used to be this glorious old 19th century cathedral of music. And so I went to the symphony from a very young age. My parents also signed me up for these little kid group music classes at a church in our neighborhood. And then when I was 6 years old, I started taking private piano lessons from a Russian immigrant piano teacher, Irina Minovich, who was strict, but by and large in a good way. She should have been stricter in some ways. I hated playing scales and etudes and just wanted to play pieces. And now my piano technique really isn't very good because I never got a true technical foundation. But I took piano lessons from age 6 to 16. When I was in 5th grade and we all got to pick a band or orchestra instrument, I picked the saxophone. Shame on me for unwittingly picking the only non-orchestral instrument that I could have picked. But I enjoyed playing the saxophone. I did get to play on Vaughan Williams' Ninth Symphony as a senior in college. So eventually I got to play in an orchestra on saxophone. But I played sax through college, took lessons in junior high and high school. And then I sang in my school's choir from 2nd grade, the first time they really had a separate like select choir that other than just music class. So I sang from 2nd grade through 7th grade, 2nd grade through 8th grade. And during 8th grade, my voice was changing and I hated the sound of my voice at that point. So I stopped singing after that year, but I picked it back up in college. I sang in my church's choir, Grace Church in Providence, Rhode Island, and then continued to sing when I moved to Cleveland and joined the Trinity Cathedral Choir. So piano, saxophone, singing. I've never taken a voice lesson, but I have a lot of choral experience and I've got a big voice and I can match pitch. So it's always made me a valuable choral singer.
Wonderful. It is 7:04. How do people feel? I don't know. I feel like MJ has questions that could go for literally days.
Yeah,
he does.
Can
I know you do.
A couple?
Let's say, okay, I'll say this. Let's do one more question. I'm sure I don't want to keep people too long and I do have dinner to make, but.
Hang on a second, really quickly. I just saw Bob Byring, who's a longtime friend of mine, raise his hand.
Oh.
He has not asked the question yet. Bob, if you want to unmute yourself, go ahead.
I did it for you.
Still muted.
In the bottom left. There you are.
All right.
Am I muted?
There we go. Yeah, we can hear you now. How are you?
Mr. Matthew, tell me a little bit about your experience with the Boar's Head at Christ Church Cathedral and what that did for you musically or directorially or whatever you want to say on that.
This is a great question.
It's a one-on-one question, I know.
No, I love it. So a formative musical experience in my life has been participating. If I have to give it a generalization, I will just say my church's Christmas pageant to someone who doesn't know. But that doesn't even come close to actually describing what it is. My church puts on a gigantic medieval English manor house Christmas feast pageant every year, the weekend after Christmas. And Bob Byring here, who just asked this question, has been the director since the 1970s of this pageant. And I have been in it, I believe, since I was 5, possibly 4, but I think I was around 5.
Had to be 5. That's the beginning age.
Yeah, so I've been in it I every single year but one since 1995. And there's a full orchestra, choir, soloists, costumes, and in the very least, it gave me a sense it contributed to my love of the grand spectacle that can be classical music performance. And I think ultimately contribute to why I love opera so much. Something regrettably I don't get to do a lot now, but I love conducting opera and I've done a lot of it. But my participation in the Boar's Head every year under the direction of Bob Byring has certainly shaped my sensibilities and my tastes in what I like to hear and see musically. Also, one of my last solo singing performances before my voice changed was a solo role in the Boar's Head, which I'm always thankful I got to do it because I lost my beautiful treble after that.
Was that King Wenceslas's?
It was King Wenceslas's page. Indeed it was.
Good for you. Tell us a little bit about, I'm going to make you run over, but about Pilgrim's Progress and your monumental effort at Christ Church again in Cincinnati.
So I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I sort of just mentioned it.
I missed that, I guess.
No, I didn't go into detail. So when I was in high school, my band director had us play a piece called October by Eric Whitacre. And I just loved this piece. And he told us that the piece was inspired by Ralph Vaughan Williams' Symphony No. 5 in D major. I went home, I listened to that piece, fell in love with it, eventually conducted it on my graduation recital from grad school. I did a little bit more research into the piece and discovered that it itself was based on music he had already written for his yet unfinished opera, The Pilgrim's Progress, based on the John Bunyan allegory. And I listened to The Pilgrim's Progress and absolutely fell in love with it, and had this totally nuts idea in college that I was going to produce a fully staged production with full orchestra of this opera. Looking back on it, I was 20 years old. I wasn't even old enough to drink. I had absolutely no business doing something like this. And a lot of people tried to talk me out of it. And I would probably now, as a 30-year-old, I would probably try to talk myself out of it. But I basically, I was put in touch with a couple of key figures who helped me find a lot of the singers. And then I basically nailed snail mail information about joining the cast and orchestra out to every high school music director and community orchestra and church choir that I could possibly come up with. Snail mail, licking the stamp, putting it in the mailbox, all the while completing a semester of classes at Brown. So somehow I got back to Cincinnati after my sophomore year, and I had almost enough interest in doing this that I could sort of get started with it. And then from there, again, we had a couple of key people who helped recruit the remaining singers and musicians for the orchestra that we needed. And I had a connection at Xavier University, one of the colleges in Cincinnati, a connection in the music department who was able to get me free rehearsal space while Xavier was on summer break. And of course, the performance took place at Christ Church Cathedral on the same altar where the Boar's Head takes place every year. And we were only in the space for the last week. It almost didn't happen. The show almost fell apart at the very end. Just the politics of opera production. But in the end, it was one of the most incredible things, to this day, one of the most incredible things that I've ever done. The 10-year anniversary is coming up July 30th and 31st of this year. The 10-year anniversary of that show, believe it or not.
I will second everything you said. It was absolutely incredible. I could not believe it. I knew from that point you would be at the Metropolitan Opera leading that orchestra at some point. That's still to come, but I knew from then on you got it made. Congratulations.
Well, Thank you. And my hope, honestly, is that the Met someday decides they finally want to do a Vaughan Williams opera for the first time. And by that point, I am known throughout the United States as the American conductor who does Vaughan Williams, and they hire me.
That's good. Yeah.
Cross your fingers for me.
Okay, so we'll make that happen. We'll just start putting things in motion now to make sure that that happens. Right time, right place. I see that we have a McKinney that joined onto the screen. Did you have a question that you wanted to?
Yes. Well, no, but since I walked in and there was discussion of Vaughan Williams, I thought you guys would like to know when I was on vacation and had 16 hours to drive and a 16-hour return drive. I contacted Matthew late one night and said, tomorrow's driving will be Vaughan Williams Day. So tell me the must listen to pieces in order of your preference. And immediately I got an enthusiastic response.
How late?
Well, for me, it was very late. It was like 11:30 at night.
Oh,
For
that's not
Matthew,
late for Matthew.
The evening is just beginning.
Because
nobody needs 8 hours of sleep.
No, yeah.
It's true. I don't need 8 hours of sleep, but I am embarrassed to say that the first part of COVID, I reverted to my college sleep schedule of going to bed between 2 and 3 a.m. and waking up between 9 and 10:30 a.m. And now that the Lake Erie is warm enough for swimming, I have now started getting up earlier, biking 10 miles to the lake, getting up at 6:30, biking 10 miles to the lake, swimming 2 miles, biking 10 miles back, and starting my day off early with exercise, which is great. And I did get up early a lot before COVID to go to morning swim practice because all of our rehearsals are in the evening. So if I want to do an organized workout, it has to be in the morning. But yeah, I for a while I had a mess of a sleep schedule that I'm sort of glad I've put in the rear view mirror.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I remember the beginning of quarantine. I would get emails from you at like 2 in the morning. I was confused as to why I was getting emails at 2 in the morning. But we can stay on and chat for a little bit longer. I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for coming and talking and saying hi. We're doing a lot of this online programming, and it's been really fun. And I think Matthew and I have enjoyed kind of crafting some ideas, and MJ as well has been in on the conversation. If you didn't know, Matthew's doing a music theory series every other Wednesday. So same time as what was tonight, but every other Wednesday, going through the basics of music theory. So if you're not registered for those and you want to be, you can on the website. Session 2 will be next week.
The first class was last week,
Yeah.
But if you want to start on the second class, and especially if you don't have a musical background, I'm sure that if you contact Rachel, she can send you the video of the first class to get you caught up. Because we're going to jump in. We're going to pick up from where we left off starting next Wednesday.
Yeah, I put my email in the chat. I can definitely send you the video. But I wanted to thank you all for being here and thank Matthew. I'm going to end the recording just so that if people want to keep talking, we can, but it's not quite as formal.